and welcome back to the Sell Like You podcast. And today I have a very special friend and somebody that I previously worked with. And so I'm very excited to welcome Ellie Swift to the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to have this conversation. I feel like we spoke about having this chat like months ago. So I'm very happy that it's here. It's like perfectly aligned with a catch up, really.
It really is. And we've just had the catch up, realized we probably should have hit record. And now we've got to remake everything that we just talked about. It's the story of my life, really, with podcasts.
Yeah, here for it. Happy to repeat all the good stuff.
Yes, good. Okay, I'm glad you're making notes. So today's episode. So Ellie, I asked you to come on, and we talked about, there's so much we could cover. I mean, you are a wealth of knowledge. But when it comes to a couple of things that have really stood out for me during our friendship, our relationship, has been about how you design your life, how you design your life in business, your life in personal life, and how they really complement one another. And something that you've always mentioned is about your rich life. And you've challenged me on this, and I love that. But what is a rich life according to you, Ellie? What does that mean?
Yeah, so I love this conversation so much. I'm so excited that we're having it, because I should just say as well, it's not a standard conversation that I have. This is definitely it's come up for us, as you say. We've had conversations back and forth about it over time. And it's not something that I talk about loads. So I feel excited to be having it, because I think it's nice to have different conversations on podcasts.
Yes.
So the concept of a rich life, I can't take credit for that concept. So just to give credit, first of all, amazing money mentor, Ramit Sethi, incredible. He has written a book and he talks about this concept of creating your rich life. And it was definitely something that my husband and I kind of started doing maybe around 5 years ago, before we knew what it was. But once we got hold of this concept, everything just went next level for us, because we were like, that's something that we do. All right, let's lean into this more. So when I think about what a rich life is, the concept of it is basically like identifying what it means for you to feel really rich. And so a couple of things there, a couple of keywords in that sentence, I would say are identifying what it feels like for you, not like what society's definition is, and what makes you feel rich. Like really asking yourself, what is it that makes you feel rich? And when we think about that word rich and break that down, it's like, well, feeling rich is feeling amazing and satiated in your senses, and excited and lit up and joyful. It's like, what is it that makes you feel really alive and loving your life? And the reason why it's such an epic concept, and the reason why I know you and I have spoken about it so much, and I remember those first conversations deeply, so good, is because it requires a lot of inner work, right? To challenge the status quo, because there is that mentality, and you spoke about this off the mic just now, there's that mentality of, well, we make money, we buy the fancy car, we buy the big house, we, go out X amount of times for dinner at the best restaurants that open, we wear certain designer clothes. And actually, I know for me and for a lot of my clients, when we truly check in with what feels good for us, some of that might give us that feeling and some of it might not. So for example, for me, I don't give a shit about cars. I drive a Volkswagen Polo. My husband, well, we both mostly drive the Prado because love a big car. I know you do too. But they're secondhand. Our Prado right now is on 250,000 kilometers, runs like a dream still. Do we need to upgrade it? No. That to me is not a thing. But do I love flying business class? Do I love living in, a big house? Yes, those are examples of my rich life. So I know we'll go in deeper to all those pieces, but essentially that's the big overview.
Yeah, amazing. And I'm really glad that you've given an example of that, because again, you mentioned the money mentor that some people may have heard of. If not, I'll pop some links in the show notes. But again, he talks about living that life very purposefully, and really going big on the things that you love, that creates that rich life, and not so big on the things that do not align. So for example, you're talking about cars, you're talking about then the alternative side of things. And again, it doesn't even, you can go as deep as the clothes that you wear, you can go as deep as, how then that business then can support. So when we align our rich lives and then we decide what that looks like in business, what are some of the key things that have really helped you succeed? And obviously you help other clients do this as well. What do you think are the big pieces around that?
When do you mean more like how you would make money in business, or do you mean, like how you'd make money in business?
How you make money in business, but how you would design your business that then supports that rich life.
Hear you. So essentially the key word that's coming up for me that everything comes back to is intentionality. So when you think about the way that you want to live your life, the way you want your schedule to look, what it is that you want to be creating, how you want to be spending your time, what are your intentions around all of those things? And again, if we're looking at this through the lens of A, how much money can I make, to B, buy the things that I'm told I'm meant to buy to be successful, we're bypassing all the really, really good questions that actually allow us to feel fulfilled and purposeful, as you said before. So really, I would come back to like the good questions that encourage you to dig a little bit deeper and do a little bit more soul searching. Because again, the amount of times I've seen clients create businesses that they then come to hate or really dislike or want to tweak and change. And, there's nothing wrong with that if you do go through that process. I know, for example, like we've had conversations where you've been through seasons where you just so epically have been like, actually, this doesn't feel good for me. I really want to spend my time here. I'm going to change this thing. And I just think that's such a great example of how you get to do that and do that well. And so continuing to ask those questions around like, what does that look like for you? And then if we were to step it back one step, I would also say a really good way to anchor all of this is to start with what your values are. So consider like, what are your core values in life? For Che and I, my husband, we have this conversation and we come together on it around, for us, it's freedom, it's family, it's adventure, it's like quality time spent together. We know those things are really important to us. And so we're always looking at everything through the lens of like, how can we incorporate more of that into our life and into our business?
Yes, I love that. I love that you've mentioned about the core values, but from the life core values, because, a lot of people come back straight into core values, business core values. And obviously your business still needs to align with your personal core values because you're the one creating the business. But if you work in an organization, you need to align with the core values of that organization whilst meeting them there on your own terms almost. And when you come at it from that perspective, you're always going to keep coming back and questioning. And I think, you talked before about adventure and about family. And again, if you think about family, you think about being in this house and everybody coming together, and then the adventure of, the business class lifestyle as an example. But in there, it's not, there aren't other components that maybe would align to other social statuses that the world is telling us we need to then, come to this part. And I think it's probably worthwhile sharing, I guess, really one of our conversations early on when we talked about this social status, and especially in sales. There is this, who drives the fanciest car, who spends the most money on their mortgage. Every sales manager loves a salesperson that has a big car lease, that has a big mortgage, that wants to go on a big fancy holiday, because it means that they're required to be more dedicated because they've got either more at risk, more to lose, or they've got more to gain. And I think, again, that's the statusy symbols from there. But then from when we go into business, we're like, okay, we're in business, we're doing well. We need to have we need to have something that's the big sign that says I'm doing well. And I find that so fascinating because, as I shared with you, I always had this goal of this Porsche Taycan that was there. It was the hybrid model. I knew what color I wanted. And it sat on it was the only thing on my vision board that I never achieved. Every year upon year, there it was. And Ellie, it was you that said to me, okay, I'll ask you this question. And you said, can you afford it? And I said, yes, I can. And you said, okay, well then what's stopping you? I was like, I just don't know if I want it. And it was in that realization, in that moment, that actually, although yes, that would be lovely, I don't believe it aligns with the values that I have in life and what I actually want to, how I want to spend my life. I would be scared of getting it scratched. I probably wouldn't get as many opportunities because I'd rock up in a Porsche and, automatically people hate you. So, again, it's coming through in so many different ways. But your explanation of the rich life, of how you've attributed to what your interpretation of the rich life, and then how you support your clients in identifying that. And for me, it was a journey. It was the point where I needed it. And I think I would say I'm probably challenged on it weekly, if not monthly, on my rich life and how I make decisions. Would you say that still comes up for you? Do you think it's forever learning?
Yeah, I really want to speak to something that you just said there, and then I'm going to answer that question. So I just wanted to say, isn't this why coaching's just so great? Because in that moment, I love the way that you spoke to that, because it would be so easy for people to listen in and be like, okay, Ellie's got thoughts on this. She was totally trying to infiltrate Harriet's views, but that really wasn't the case. I literally asked you that question of well, why don't you have this? And it was just so clear to me that I knew the money that you had. I knew what was possible for you at that time. I knew your level of disposable income, loosely. And I also know your potential, your capacity. Your girl here goes after everything she wants and she gets it. And so it was what's going on here actually? And it was so cool to play with that. And I remember you being like, yeah, there's something in this, because I do get what I want. I am great at manifesting. I can go after this. And so I just wanted to speak to that. And because I think that for anyone that's listening, this is the power of asking yourself those questions. You really get to self-coach around this and go deep on those questions, knowing that you're going to uncover some really cool things. So to answer your question around how often does that come up, I really agree with you around it's an ongoing process. And the reason why I think that is because of this very modern world that we live in. If we think about the fact that we're constantly bombarded with messaging, advertising, I mean, look, I'm a marketer, you're a salesperson. We're part of this, we know what it looks like to communicate clear, enticing messages to the right ideal client. And we ourselves are surrounded by that. And so it takes a certain level of overlaying with self-reflection constantly to ask ourselves, do we truly want that thing? So for example, just to share some examples, I might be scrolling through Instagram and I might see a picture of a girl who kind of looks a bit like me, maybe has a similar vibe to me, who's wearing a really epic necklace. And my brain is just going to be like, I want that. But then it's okay, well, let's just check in before I hit buy on that. Do I actually want more jewelry right now? Is that a thing that I want? I've made a commitment to myself. So this is a real thing. In this moment, I've made a commitment to myself that actually in this season of my life, I'm done with the rich life of buying clothes. That was very 2021, 2022, Ellie. Right now, my rich life is really bougie homewares. That's my rich life right now. But it would be so easy to be like, oh, well, I can just afford that. Why wouldn't I buy it? But actually that's not true for me. It's not going to bring me joy. I'm potentially going to experience buyer's remorse. It's just nothing about that is going to feel good. So when you check in and ask those questions, which again happen repeatedly, it's going to really give you that opportunity to recenter and feel great about not only the money that you're making, but the way that you're spending it, and then the life that you're building because of that.
Yeah, I love that. And again, I think, the majority of people that listen to this podcast are, business owners and salespeople. And again, I think, coming back to the salespeople that earn a decent amount of money. I mean, I think sales is actually one of the highest paying jobs in the world. And so, you are always able to make that decision to choose. And it would be very interesting for somebody that maybe feels that, this is the path they're on, this is what they need as that status symbol, to actually really challenge what that means to them. And then how they then want to be perceived. Because again, coming back to status symbols and cars and things like that, is that I do feel, and I do still think that this is very prevalent in today's age, is that you do still have to be really mindful of what you show up in. Because again, if you're going in to teach somebody how to do something, whether it's scaling, whether it's training, I feel like your representation of your brand still needs to sit at a certain level. So again, I don't feel like you could show up in your 23-year-old car, with the door hanging off and get out. It doesn't say very much about you. So I think there's always a balance between that as well, in terms of who you are, what you're doing. I always remember a guy who I used to come up against in sales, and he'd gone to one of my biggest clients. And at the time, I think I drove a VW Tiguan. It was a new range, so it was fairly. It was. I was on the scale, like I was there, and it was a lovely car to drive. But my competitor rocked up to the same office a few days later in a Porsche, and the CFO clocked the Porsche come into the car park. He went in, gave his quote, and the CFO said, for every single quote he sends through, I want 20% off every single quote he sends, because he saw him in the Porsche in the car park. And I never ever got queried about pricing, and that really stuck with me again. And I think my dad always taught me that as well, being an architect, dealing with big, large firms that make big decisions. And he would design the cinemas all around the UK. And he really wanted at the time, I think it was the Jaguar, the 2-seater, the sports version, and he never bought it. And I was like, Dad, like that is his rich life is cars and motorbikes and travel, I would say. And I was like, Dad, buy the car. Life's too short. Enjoy it. You will appreciate it for every single day you get in it. And he said, yeah, but I probably won't get half the jobs that I'm tendering for. And I think, again, it's understanding those sides of it as well, which is such a different context in sales also.
Totally. Well, two things come up for me as you're speaking there. The first is two things can be true. And with that point, it's that whole thing of,
I like that.
You can be thinking about what your rich life is and know that it's not a car. But you can be somebody who, for example, is an independent salesperson and know that a very specific car is going to really support you in your work. And arguably, if your values are around your work and being like a certain type of salesperson for a certain type of market, and that's your highest priority, then that's kind of going to override, whether you actually care about the car. And so that would be the decision.
The other piece.
Right. And so again,
yes.
When you overlay,
yeah, I'm glad you said that.
Right. And so it's that two things can be true here, and kind of playing with that. And again, it's that. So obviously, again, as marketers, as salespeople, again, I'm also thinking about what is my brand? And there's always, things that I would think about through that lens. So for me, being an online business owner that rarely does business outside of my home, car's not important to me. But if it was, would I run it through that lens? For sure. So I think that's the really cool thing to play with here is again, you're making a smart decision based on your values. Where we get to catch ourselves is where we go, am I buying this car because it's going to make me look really great in front of my friends, or because I get to tell people I have that car? Or do I want to live in a certain suburb because if I say the name of that suburb or I put that suburb down anywhere, people are automatically going to think that I'm of a certain level of status? That's very different to it supporting you in your work in a certain way versus the status level of that. And I also think, and Che and I have this conversation all the time, Che being my husband, for those of you listening, I think that there is so much legitimacy in the undercover billionaire. I love seeing
yes.
Right? I love seeing people who have so much money who are so unassuming in their wealth.
Yes, totally. And do you know, I feel like if you look at the the millionaire billionaire status, and again, we both live in WA, and we've got a lot of them in WA. I think the highest is the highest capita per square meter or something. And you've got them, but they are, I think, again, because they came from farming, mining, wineries, that they've lived this dirt life almost. And so it would be like the fit for purpose. They can't drive their fancy, sports car with no suspension, down to the mine site. They jump in their Prado and off they go. And, and you can usually, there's a few little telltales about it might be like their boots or, certain things that are there that yeah, exactly, that they need, to actually perform the job, but it's very rarely anything else, above that. And I think that is really interesting. But I think the piece that I'm taking out from what you said, Ellie, is the permission. And I think this all comes back to permission to make your own decisions of what success looks like, of what your rich life looks like, and encouraging people to really question that, have fun with it, which you've always said. You've said this throughout today's conversation, but really tuning in. And I think this moves us into, I guess, really something else I wanted to talk about with you today, which is around that herd mentality, which I guess really comes in with, okay, if I'm successful, I have to insert thing. And again, we've got such an insight into people's lives through the social media, but especially into business. And again, to really springboard your business, you're adding value, you're sharing insights, you're bringing the personality, and especially in that small business world, across the likes of, say, Instagram and Facebook, people are giving such a look in as to what they're doing that day, what they're eating, how they're showing up, how much money they've made, which is totally, again, just so foreign to me from being in the corporate world and working with corporate clients. It's never sung out. We never share about how much money a company's made that month. But then in the small business, it's like this status symbol to go to the next level and what people want to share. And I feel like a lot of that can lead down to this, what they're doing, I should be doing, but also tying in a bit of that imposter syndrome as well. Would you agree?
Definitely. I think that so much of this comes down to the way in which we're using social media as well, and our consumption habits, and being really mindful of that and what that looks like for us personally as business owners. I'm going to talk to some examples that you just shared there and maybe speak about those in a little bit more detail. So obviously in, as you say, the small business owner space, we see things like people sharing what they're earning on social media, which, as you say, can bring about a lot of that imposter syndrome and that comparisonitis. I always think about this as, okay, I'm going to look at it. I'm going to talk about through two lenses. The first being like, is that something you should necessarily share? And then the second is how you might perceive that information if you're seeing it. Is that something that you should share concept or thought is, I think that it's really important to, when you're sharing that information, think about why you might be sharing it and who it's relevant for. So for example, when I think about times in the past where it's been something that I've personally shared, I've done so through the lens of, I hope that this inspires you. I hope that this allows you to see what's possible for, when I share what's been possible for myself and for my clients as well. And so I think that's really important to do that through the lens of like, what's the purpose of actually sharing this? Or is this just an ego trip? And then on the flip side of that, so much of it is about then like, how are we perceiving this information and what does it actually mean for us? So I think if we see things and we go into that imposter, again, and I feel like this is almost the theme of this episode is like, I would invite you to get really inquisitive with why some of that imposter syndrome or comparisonitis might be coming up for you. If, for example, you saw somebody who is earning, let's say you saw somebody who had 100K month and you yourself were doing 50K months and you saw that and you were like, that person's in my field. They're doing 100K months. I see that and I feel things. I feel imposter syndrome. I feel irritated. Like, invite yourself to get curious. Like, what are you feeling if you see that? What is coming up for you there? And then why is that coming up? Because a lot of the time, that curiosity will help you to see that maybe that's actually something that you want as well. And that's okay. And if so, then you get to go, right, what am I doing to make that happen for myself? Or you might feel triggered by, like, you know, the way in which they're earning it not being aligned to you, or their style of talking about it not being aligned to you. Like, really allowing yourself to get curious there, and then coming back to a place of being like deeply empowered and going, well, okay, this is in your field for some reason, because there is a possibility that it's yours as well. And so what does that look like for you? Is that something that you want? Why do you want it? And what does your action plan look like to make that happen as well?
Yes, I love the flip part of making it what you want and making it more aligned to then the curious bits. Again, I think, everything that you teach comes back to, okay, be aware of it. Like, let's take note of that. Where is that coming from? Let's get curious. It's not just, okay, this is how you feel, let's change it. Because we know, although we might say that's what we're going to do, we're just going to change that, we're going to change our mindset, and then we're set. Actually, we need to understand where it's come from first. And I think, again, linking that into to even just posting. Like, I get a lot of clients that will come to me when I've given them a strategy around LinkedIn as an example, and we're talking about sharing really low level value driven content. It's not, we're not challenging a perception. We're not disagreeing. We're not being very opinionated. We're just sharing something that's relevant to the industry that will support one person. So again, what we're putting out, why are we putting it out? And often the reluctance is so strong at that point that, we even go to the point where we write it together, where it is, we're really clear. We're really clear on what we're putting out there, why we're putting it out, and actually using their language. That even so, it's still not posted, and 2 weeks later we revisit it again, and it's like, oh yeah, I'll do it tomorrow. And I think that comes back into, actually, what are you, using your questions? What are you afraid of? What do you fear will happen when you hit post? What do you fear people will say? And getting curious into why you're bothered by that. Would you say that's the correct question?
I love it. So yes, 100%. I think that, it's like you say, it's flipping that process of basically being like, well, what's going on here? Like, what is my resistance all about? Because usually there is like a sub layer, like there's something there. Maybe there's a particular person that you really don't want to see that content, and you've got a reason as to why that is. And it's like letting go of that. Maybe it is like fear around you being perceived, or like being perceived as an expert, and the fear of what that label might mean for you. Maybe it is people coming at you with questions that you don't know how to answer. Like, if you go deep into that, what will happen is then you can walk yourself through the process. And so a process that I would do once you've got curious there is like a bit of a fear inventory, where you basically go through and you're like, all right, I feel like you're smiling because you've like heard me talk about this term like a million times, but like you basically go, right, okay, what are my fears here? Like, what actually is the fear? And because of the way that we're wired as humans, like we are wired to fear saber-toothed tigers in the wild. But nowadays in our modern world, that looks like we're wired to fear the scary boss, or we're wired to fear the person in high school who once bullied us, who we know still looks at our like LinkedIn posts, or we're wired to fear that old colleague who was like quite intimidating to us. And so if we get really curious and we write down like, what are all those fears that come up for us, and what is actually the worst case scenario there? So for example, is the worst case scenario that your old colleague who was quite intimidating sees that post, goes to another colleague, laughs at you, and they have a private conversation and people are laughing about you behind your back? Is that the worst case scenario? How does that make you feel? What does that mean for you? Like, if we step it out, when we do that, one of two things will happen. The first is that we're going to go, okay, that's actually not as scary as I think it is. And now that I've allowed my logical brain to go through that process, I can recognize that there's less of a problem here. It still feels scary in my body. And that is a very primal thing. And that's okay. But I'm going to allow my logical brain to move forward with the thing. And I know repetition will support me to start to rewire those habits that, or the patterns or the neurological programming in my brain that's telling me I should be afraid of this. Once I start taking the action, I'll build the evidence to know that I'm okay. So that's like the first thing that happens. Or the second thing that happens is we go, okay, there's something here that is like a deep trauma or a deep fear or a really big thing. That is the specific thing that I've got to go ahead and look at, because that's stopping me from everything. And maybe it is some sort of childhood trauma or an experience that you've had that you've never actually processed before. And, you know, we as humans, we're walking around with all sorts of experiences that we've had in our lives that may actually be limitations that we aren't even aware of. So giving yourself that opportunity to really dive in deeper to that and assess like what actually is going on here is going to really support you to either A, move forward faster because you recognize those fears aren't that scary or as scary as your body thinks they are, or B, identify something that you give yourself the opportunity to truly move through.
Yeah, I really love those two scenarios. And I think, again, I know I was smiling when you said, you know, a fear inventory, because I feel like that's something that people are just like, why would I do that? Why would I want to know what I'm fearful of and really look into that? It's a little bit like, it reminds me of when Brene Brown talks about that she was a researcher of shame, and she's like, that's a conversation stopper right there. And I find that very interesting. You know, again, we're looking at these sides of, you know, of us as a very complex human as to what is stopping us, because ultimately, you know, coming back to, you know, why your purpose in creating your business, we've attached that with our, you know, with our rich life. We get to design the life around the business that we are creating, or around the sales that you're able to create based on salespeople potentially listening. And when we then tie that then in with showing up, with adding value, with being seen, that's what we need to do to connect with others to build a successful business. And if we can't do that, can't have the rich life, we can't help others, because that's what we're here, that's our purpose in our business. And everything stops there, all because we were fearful. And actually when we break it down, we were fearful of what could potentially be perceived as a fairly small thing that really held us back. And I can, you know, talk from experiences, I'm sure you can as well, Ellie, that once you understand that fear and you move past the fear, whether it is posting on LinkedIn, because although, you know, I post regularly on LinkedIn, there is still times that I do, you know, obviously I'm always aware of what I'm posting, but there are certain things that are a little bit more confronting than others. And when you understand, okay, what is the fear? Often it comes back to the perception of who I am, versus the value that I can give. And as soon as we stop thinking about ourselves and we think about who we can support, it really shifts that around. And I think, again, everything we've talked about today comes back to curiosity, comes back to questioning, comes back to just taking a minute and be really mindful. And, you know, you've got an extremely supportive husband in Shay, but you've got friends, you've got colleagues, you've got partners around where you can voice this, or even, you know, have this conversation with, can we have some fun with this? Can we design our rich life? Can we, because so much comes from just having fun and playing with certain things in life and also in business.
I really want to speak to something briefly that you just touched on there, because just like preach to all of that. First of all, you spoke to something that I think is really interesting here, and almost to me feels like the whole, like if anyone was going to take anything from this episode, or if you're going to tune into anything, please tune into like the thing I'm about to say. So if you are wondering, like, why would I do something like the fear inventory? Like, why would I focus on going there? Why would I ask those curious questions? The greatest high performers do the deeper shadow work. Like the people who create the most success are the people who are willing to go there. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, why would I do that work? Like, I want to look at like how I can make more revenue in the business next month, or how I can like increase my sales targets. Keep doing that. Like, I'm a strategist here with you on all of that. And also, it's clearing all those subconscious or unconscious blocks that we have as humans that make us better at our work, better leaders, better in terms of being able to show up and connect and be better at marketing and sales. It's that work that's going to support us to get the best possible high-performing results that we most want. So if you're ever like, why would I do that work? Know that it's that work that supports you to go to your next levels. Like, it's that work that is going to help you make more money next month. Like, almost guaranteed every single time. Those deeper layers that you uncover, they're the things that catapult you to your next level.
Yes. And I love that, coming from there, if you can take one thing away from today's podcast, we've covered, a few different topics, but again, they all feed in to that one. But ultimately, the thing that's holding you back is something a little bit deeper. It's not necessarily a strategy or, a technique. It's often just actually looking within. I really love that you've highlighted that. And I think that brings us to a really good close, because I think there's not really much more value we can chuck into that. Well, I'm sure there is. But there's not much more that we really want people to take away. And I guess really the goal of today's episode was obviously for us to have a catch up, number one. But number two, for those listening, to take away some of the incredible, advice from what Ellie shared, from our experiences in business, in life, in working with so many incredible people, around the world, which we've been extremely privileged to do so in our own businesses. And so I'm going to close off with a question for you, Ellie. So you've created, wealth, you've created this incredible business, you've got multiple streams of revenue, and different offerings. What would you say that your secret to success has been?
I would say that initially in those early years, it was like deep self-belief and trust in myself, and deciding that I was going to make it work no matter what. And that being the thing that I came back to at every single corner, every single day, because, there are so many challenges, especially in those early years. And then secondly, I would say it's because I was tenacious. And that tenacity is not to be confused with like I was a ball breaker, or I, was super assertive or pushy. Like, that's not what I'm saying. I was tenacious in that I went after what I wanted until I got it. I knew what I wanted, and I really committed to that. And that meant working long hours at the start. And sometimes still it meant committing to and deciding what I wanted, and, having the necessary conversations, doing the necessary work, taking the necessary risks, posting the scary things to make that happen. So being really tenacious, going after what I wanted, doing the work to make it happen.
Incredible. Well, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your tips, your tools, and your experience. I'll pop in the show notes where people can find you, along with our references from today's episode. But thank you so much for being here.
Such a pleasure. I've loved this conversation. Thank you for having me.